You may not know what it's like to be in one of these relationships, but here's why you should care. Because when someone is inside a pathological relationship, it doesn't stay contained inside the relationship. It spills out into literally everything. It spills out into how they sleep, how they think, how they talk, how they parent, how they work, how they show up with friends, and how much of themselves they can still access on any given day. And if you're a friend or a family member watching this from the outside, this is one of the things that can be so confusing. You may see your loved one changing and not understand why. You may notice they seem more anxious, more guarded, more distracted, more exhausted, or a lot less like themselves. You may be thinking, why are they acting this way? Or why are they pulling away? Or why do they seem to be making everything harder for themselves? But often what you're seeing isn't a personality flaw. It's actually the adaptation that needs to happen in order for someone to survive inside one of these relationships. You're seeing a nervous system trying to survive a relationship that has become emotionally unsafe. And that matters because these relationships can quietly shape a person's behavior in ways that look unrelated on the surface, but are actually tied directly to the constant pressure they're living under. One of the first things to shift is often not the behavior, but their energy. They may seem tired all the time, not just sleepy, but worn down and preoccupied, mentally elsewhere. They may not be as present in conversation. They may forget things more easily. They may seem less spontaneous or less joyful than they used to be. And that can be very heartbreaking to watch because it feels like you're losing the person in front of you. But what's often happening is that so much of their internal energy is being consumed by managing the relationship that there is less left for everything else. They are mentally scanning, emotionally bracing, trying to predict moods, trying to avoid conflict, trying to keep the peace, trying to not set off the next rupture. That kind of chronic internal management takes a toll, and over time, it changes how a person moves through the world. At work, this can look like distraction, self-doubt, or inconsistency. A person may be capable and intelligent, but suddenly less focused than usual. They may seem scattered. They may second-guess themselves. They may lose confidence in decisions they used to make easily. They may start over-explaining things, apologizing excessively, or worrying too much about how they're perceived. Sometimes they call in sick more. Sometimes they throw themselves into work as a way to escape home. Sometimes they seem emotionally flat because they are conserving all their internal resources just to get through the day. You might assume that they're disengaged or unmotivated, but in reality, they may be living in a state of prolonged stress that has hijacked their concentration and emotional bandwidth. With friends, the changes can be just as noticeable. They might withdraw. They may stop answering texts quickly. They may cancel plans more often. They may seem less available, less open, or less able to be fully present. And if they do show up, they may seem quieter or more guarded than before. Don't misread this as disinterest, because too often the person isn't pulling away because they don't care. They might be pulling away because they're overwhelmed, ashamed, confused, or being subtly isolated by the relationship itself. And your friendship may have been weaponized against them. They might just be disengaging because whenever they engage, they're being punished, and it's just easier to avoid an outside life than to deal with the repercussions. Because many pathological relationships create distance from outside support, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it happens through guilt, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through constant crisis, sometimes through the sense that the person's attention has been slowly captured until everything else feels harder to maintain. So if someone you care about has become less connected, less responsive, it may not be because they no longer value the relationship with you. It may be because they're trapped in a dynamic that is slowly consuming them. With family, this often shows up as defensiveness, secrecy, or sudden emotional distance. They may not want to talk about what's happening, and they might minimize the situation. They may get irritated when family members ask questions and say that everything's fine, even when it's clearly not. Or they may become more reactive than usual, especially if anyone challenges the relationship. That can be hard for families because from the outside it can look like denial or stubbornness, but often it's fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being told to leave before they're ready, fear of having to confront something they're not emotionally prepared to name yet, and sometimes, especially in coercive or highly manipulative relationships, the person has already been trained to protect the relationship at all costs. So when family members raise concern, the person may respond as if they're defending not just the partner, but the survival structure that they are relying on. One of the deepest effects of a pathological relationship is that it can slowly alter identity. The person may become smaller, quieter, more cautious, less sure of what they want, less sure of what they feel. They may stop expressing preferences as openly. They may start anticipating everyone else's needs while ignoring their own. They may become more reactive in some areas and more numb in others. And that can be very confusing for the people who knew them before. You may think, this isn't like them. And in many ways, you're right. But that doesn't necessarily mean the person is fake or being dramatic. It means they're changing in response to prolonged relational strain. When someone spends a lot of time in a relationship where their reality is questioned, their boundaries are pushed, or their emotional responses are punished, they can start losing easy access to who they are. They begin performing stability instead of feeling it. They begin surviving instead of thriving. This next part is something that people often miss. When someone is under chronic relational stress, it affects the nervous system. That means the impact doesn't stay in their thoughts. It shows up in their body. It shows up as headaches, stomach issues, trouble sleeping, jaw tension, exhaustion, or a constant feeling of being on edge. They may seem jumpy, irritable, or unusually sensitive. They may have trouble relaxing, even in safe environments. And because of that, their behavior in other parts of life can start looking inconsistent. One day they seem fine, the next day they seem overwhelmed. One moment they seem assertive, the next they seem frozen. That inconsistency can be a sign that their nervous system is overloaded, not that they're unreliable or difficult. Now, just because we might have identified the relationship might not be healthy, doesn't mean we're going to leave right away. And this is important for friends and family to understand. People don't usually stay because they don't see any problems. They stay because the relationship has become psychologically complicated. There may be love. There may be fear. There may be hope. Maybe there's financial dependence. Maybe there's kids. There's shame. There's probably isolation, intermittent kindness that keeps them emotionally hooked, real hope that things will go back to the beginning. So from the outside, it can look like indecision, but from the inside, it can feel like survival. That's why pressure usually backfires. If someone is already doubting themselves, shaming them or rushing them or cornering them may just make them shut down more, and you'll lose access. What they usually need first isn't pressure. They need safety. They need consistency. They need someone who can stay steady while they sort out what's happening. If this sounds like someone you know, here are some signs that they may be under the influence of one of these relationships. They seem more anxious, distracted, or exhausted than usual. They're harder to reach emotionally. They defend a partner who clearly causes them distress. They've stopped doing things they used to enjoy, and they seem more isolated from friends or family. You're noticing that they're doubting themselves more or extremely apologetic over even really small things. They talk like they're walking on eggshells. They're constantly trying to explain, justify, or smooth over their partner's behavior, or they seem less like themselves over time. None of these signs prove a pathological relationship on their own, but taken together, they can tell a story. And when someone's personality seems to be changing in the context of a relationship, you might want to pay attention to that. If you suspect someone you love may be in one of these relationships, the best thing you can often do is just to stay connected without trying to force a conclusion. You can say things like, I noticed you seem a little stressed lately. Is there anything I can do to help? I'm here if you ever want to talk. You don't have to explain everything to me. I'm happy to just sit with you. I care about you and I'm not going anywhere. That kind of steady presence matters because one of the most damaging parts of these relationships is that the person often feels increasingly alone inside them. If you can be a calm, non-judgmental point of contact, you may become one of the few places that they can breathe. So if you're watching someone you love change and you can't quite put your finger on why, don't dismiss it too quickly. Pathological relationships don't only damage the relationship itself, they shape how a person thinks, feels, behaves, and shows up in every part of life. They can change their confidence, their energy, their friendships, their work, their parenting, their body, and their sense of self. And if you're the one in it, I want you to know this too. What looks like you becoming different may actually be your system adapting to something overwhelming. That doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're under strain, and strain can be relieved. Recovery can happen. Your identity can return, and you can rebuild trust in yourself again. And with the right support, the person you are beneath the survival mode can come back into view. And if you are in one of these relationships, I've listed some resources in the description. As always, safety first. See you next time.